The message arrived on every screen across human space at exactly midnight, standard Earth time. Every colony, every station, every ship received the same transmission. The Vecturi Dominion had given humanity 72 hours to surrender all outer colonies or face complete extinction. The Alien Council believed humans would submit. They had calculated wrong. Admiral Helena Cross stood on the bridge of the Hind Sovereignty, the flagship of the human Imperial fleet. She watched the voting numbers climb across her personal display. Across 300 worlds and countless stations, every adult citizen was casting their vote. The question was simple: surrender or fight? The Vecturi expected fear. They expected division. They expected humans to break. The final count came in at hour 48. 94% of humanity had voted for war. Not just a majority. Nearly everyone. Farmers on distant agricultural worlds had voted alongside factory workers on industrial moons. Scientists in orbital laboratories had cast the same choice as miners in asteroid belts. Humanity had spoken with one voice. Cross felt pride swell in her chest as she read the official declaration. The democratic process had worked exactly as intended. The people had been given a choice between slavery and death or freedom and battle. They chose battle. Now it was her job to deliver victory. The Vecturi had spent centuries conquering species across the galaxy. They had absorbed 47 civilizations into their dominion. Each conquest had followed the same pattern: threaten, demand surrender, accept tribute. When species resisted, the Dominion crushed them with overwhelming force. Their fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their soldiers were bred for combat. Their technology was ancient and refined. Against this, humanity had only existed as a spacefaring species for 300 years. The Imperial fleet consisted of just 12,000 combat vessels. Human soldiers were not genetically modified warriors. They were ordinary men and women who had chosen to serve. But the Vecturi had made a critical error in their calculations. They measured strength in numbers and resources. They could not understand what drove humans to fight against impossible odds. Admiral Cross addressed her fleet through the quantum communication network. Her words reached every captain, every pilot, every Marine across the formation. She did not speak of glory or destiny. She spoke of home. She spoke of children who deserved to grow up free. She spoke of ancestors who had fought and died so that future generations could reach the stars. The fleet moved toward the Vecturi border in perfect formation. 12,000 ships carrying 2 million sailors and soldiers. Behind them, every human world had begun transformation into a fortress. Civilian factories switched to military production. Universities became training academies. The entire species prepared for total war. The first battle occurred at the Meridian System, a human mining colony that the Vecturi had targeted as their initial conquest. The enemy arrived with a fleet of 30,000 vessels, expecting to find perhaps a few defensive stations. Instead, they found 3,000 Imperial warships waiting in ambush positions. Captain James Okonkwo commanded the destroyer Hind's Relentless from the center of the formation. His ship was small compared to the massive Vecturi cruisers, but it carried weapons designed by human engineers who understood that creativity could match brute force. The battle began with a coordinated missile barrage that lit up space with nuclear fire. Vecturi shields held against the initial assault, just as human tacticians had predicted. But the missiles were a distraction. While enemy commanders focused on the obvious threat, human electronic warfare specialists worked to infiltrate Vecturi computer systems. Humanity had learned something important about their enemy during decades of observation. The Dominion relied heavily on centralized command structures. Their ships communicated through a network that connected directly to their commanders. It was efficient. It was also vulnerable. When the virus activated, half the Vecturi fleet suddenly lost coordination. Ships that had been executing precise maneuvers began drifting or firing at empty space. Commanders screamed orders that never reached their subordinates. In that moment of chaos, the human fleet struck. Railguns accelerated metal slugs to incredible velocities. Plasma lances cut through hulls weakened by electromagnetic disruption. Boarding pods launched toward disabled vessels, carrying Marines who fought through corridors designed for creatures twice their size. The Battle of Meridian lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the victory had lost 22,000 ships. Humanity had lost 800. It was a victory that should have been impossible. News of the defeat spread through the Dominion like a disease. For the first time in their recorded history, the victory had lost a significant naval engagement. The conquered species within their empire began to whisper. Perhaps the masters were not invincible after all. Supreme Commander Thrallax received reports of the battle in his fortress at the heart of Dominion space. He was ancient, even by victory standards, having lived through dozens of successful conquests. He had never failed. He would not fail now. Thrallax assembled the largest fleet in Dominion history, 200,000 warships carrying billions of warriors. He would crush the humans with such force that no species would ever again consider resistance. He would make an example that would echo through eternity. Admiral Cross knew the enemy was coming. Human intelligence networks had penetrated deep into Dominion communications. She understood that the next battle would determine everything. Victory meant survival. Defeat meant extinction. The Imperial fleet gathered at the Argos Nebula, a region of space where cosmic dust and radiation would hamper sensors and communications. Cross had chosen the battlefield carefully. In open space, the Victory could use their numerical advantage to surround and destroy human forces. In the nebula, size became a disadvantage. Human ships were designed for independent action. Each captain understood the overall strategy, but could make tactical decisions without waiting for orders. Victory vessels required constant guidance from their commanders. In the confusion of the nebula, this difference would matter. The battle began when Victory scouts entered the outer regions of the nebula. They detected human ships and reported back to Thrallax. The Supreme Commander ordered his fleet forward, confident that numbers would guarantee victory. Inside the nebula, reality became chaos. Sensor readings flickered and died. Communications broke apart into static. Ships emerged from dust clouds to find enemies or allies with equal surprise. The careful formations that Victory commanders had practiced for centuries became meaningless. Human captains adapted instantly. They formed small hunting groups that struck at vulnerable targets and vanished before retaliation could arrive. They used the radiation to mask their engine signatures. They turned the environment into a weapon. Lieutenant Sarah Chun piloted a fighter through the swirling dust, her squadron following close behind. She had grown up on a farm world, learning to fly in atmospheric storms that would terrify most pilots. The nebula felt almost peaceful by comparison. Her sensors detected a Victory carrier drifting through a particularly dense cloud. Its fighter bays were open, launching craft that immediately lost contact with their mothership. Chun smiled and led her squadron into an attack run that ended with the carrier's destruction. Across the nebula, similar scenes repeated thousands of times. Human ships appeared from hiding, delivered devastating attacks, and disappeared before the enemy could respond. Victory commanders issued orders that never reached their intended recipients. Their beautiful fleet became a collection of isolated vessels fighting their own desperate battles. Admiral Cross commanded from the center of the nebula, where her fleet had established a concealed base of operations. She received reports through tight beam communications that cut through the interference. She watched the enemy fleet die piece by piece. Thrallax realized his mistake too late. He ordered retreat, but his signals could not reach most of his fleet. Ships that tried to escape found human hunters waiting at the nebula's edge. The great armada that had seemed unstoppable became scattered wreckage, drifting through cosmic dust. The Battle of Argy's Nebula lasted 4 days. When the dust settled and sensors cleared, humanity had destroyed 140,000 Vecthory warships. The Dominion's military power had been shattered in a single engagement. News of the catastrophe spread through the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. Conquered species that had served the Dominion for millennia saw opportunity in the chaos. Rebellions erupted on dozens of worlds. The empire that had seemed eternal began to crumble. Admiral Cross did not stop to celebrate. She understood that victory required more than winning battles. It required ensuring that the enemy could never threaten humanity again. The Imperial fleet moved toward Dominion space, liberating conquered worlds and destroying military installations. The war lasted 3 years. Human forces fought their way to the Vecthory homeworld, not to conquer, but to demand permanent peace. The Dominion Council, reduced to a fraction of its former power, had no choice but to accept humanity's terms. The treaty established humanity as a major power in galactic civilization. Humans would protect species that chose freedom. They would oppose any attempt at conquest or domination. The stars that had once seemed filled with threats became a neighborhood where humans could walk without fear. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted in every city. The Electorate that had voted for war now celebrated the victory they had made possible. Ordinary citizens who had never held weapons had contributed through their work, their sacrifice, their refusal to surrender. Admiral Cross attended ceremonies on 300 worlds, accepting thanks from grateful populations. But she found her greatest pride in visiting the memorial that listed every human who had died in the war. 200,000 names carved into stone, each representing someone who had given everything for humanity's survival. She spoke at the dedication ceremony. Her words carried across human space. She did not claim credit for victory. She gave it to the voters who had shown courage when given a choice. She gave it to the soldiers who had fought against terrible odds. She gave it to the civilians who had transformed their worlds into arsenals of democracy. The Vecthory had believed that fear would break humanity. They had not understood that humans grew stronger under pressure. They had not realized that a species that chose its own leaders would fight harder than any empire of slaves. The Electorate had chosen war because they understood that some things mattered more than survival: freedom, dignity, the right to determine their own future. They had placed their trust in their fleet, and that fleet had delivered victory. Humanity emerged from the war changed forever. They had proven themselves worthy of their place among the stars. They had shown that democracy was not weakness but strength. They had demonstrated that ordinary people, given a voice and a choice, would make extraordinary sacrifices for what they believed. The galaxy would never forget the lesson. When threatened, humans voted. When they voted for war, they won.